It all started with the little things, late night calls, smiles that seemed a bit too strained, and those silences the kind that speak louder than words. I'm not one to snoop around, but something felt off. So one evening I decided to ask Claire, my wife, straight up. Her response, a nervous laugh followed by, "You're being paranoid, love." I wanted to believe her, I really did. The days that followed were like living in a detective novel. A lipstick shade I didn't recognize on a shirt, bills from restaurants I'd never been to, and a fragrance, one that I'd never smelled on her. Each clue felt like a stab in the heart, you know? But Claire, she remained unflappable, almost too much so. I tried to shake off the nagging feeling, telling myself it was all in my head. But deep down I knew something was amiss. The late nights at work became more frequent, and her phone was now guarded like a treasure. I remember this one night when I woke up to find her side of the bed empty. Tiptoeing to the living room, I found her on the phone, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't talk now, he might hear." My heart sank. The next day was a blur. I went through the motions at work, my mind racing with questions and fears. Was I losing her? Was there someone else? That evening, I decided I needed answers. I confronted her, my voice shaking. "Claire, is there something you're not telling me?" Her eyes darted away before meeting mine. "Mark, you're imagining things. We're fine." But we weren't fine. The distance between us grew, and the smiles faded. I felt like I was living with a stranger. It was then I decided I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The suspicion was eating me alive, and I couldn't let it go on. I started paying more attention, noticing every small detail. The way she'd jump at every text, her sudden interest in dressing up for grocery shopping, and the late night whispers on the phone. The pieces were falling into place, but I needed concrete proof. One night I pretended to sleep, waiting for her to sneak out of the room. As soon as I heard the door click shut, I followed. There, in the dim light of our street, I saw her laughing and holding hands with someone I'd never seen before. My world came crashing down. I didn't confront her right away. I needed time to process what I'd seen. The love of my life, the woman I trusted more than anyone, was living a double life. The questions haunted me. Why? How? When did our love fade into this abyss of lies? As I lay there in our bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized that this was just the beginning. I had to unravel the truth, but I was scared of what I might find. Little did I know, this was only the tip of the iceberg, and the revelations to come would turn my world upside down. If my story resonates with you, or if you're simply captivated by this unraveling mystery, hit the like button and subscribe. The days that followed felt like I was a character in a crime thriller. It was surreal, you know? Every detail seemed to leap out, each one a puzzle piece in a picture I didn't want to complete. There was this unfamiliar shade of lipstick on one of my white shirts. A careless mistake, or a silent message. I didn't even have the courage to ask Claire about it. Then there were the restaurant bills. Places I'd never heard of, let alone visited. These slips of paper were like breadcrumbs leading to a truth I wasn't sure I wanted to find. And the perfume, a scent I'd never smelled on Claire before. Subtle but distinct, haunting me like a ghost. Each clue felt like a dagger to my heart. It was the small things that hurt the most, you see. The way she quickly shut down her laptop when I walked into the room, or how her phone suddenly had a password. Our conversations had become a series of monosyllables. "How was your day?" I'd ask. "Fine," she'd reply, her eyes never meeting mine. But Claire, she remained unshakable, almost eerily so. Whenever I tried to probe, to understand what was happening, she'd deflect with an ease that was almost admirable. "You're just stressed," she'd say, "or you're imagining things, Mark." Her calmness in the face of my growing anxiety was disconcerting. It was as if she was playing a role and playing it too well. I started to feel isolated in my own home. It was as if Claire and I were living in parallel universes, close yet miles apart. I missed her, the real her, not this distant, enigmatic version. I longed for the days when we'd laugh over a silly TV show or plan our next vacation with excitement. Now our interactions were limited to necessities, functional yet void of warmth. The more I observed, the more the pieces started to fall into place, forming a picture I couldn't bear to look at. The late-night texts, the sudden weekend trips to see her sister, the increasing number of nights she'd had to work late. It all pointed to one heart-wrenching possibility. Claire was having an affair. But admitting that to myself was like opening a Pandora's box of pain and betrayal. I wasn't ready for that, not yet. So I kept quiet, watching and waiting, hoping against hope that I was wrong. But deep down, I knew that the storm was coming, and it was only a matter of time before it hit. As I lay next to her in bed, watching her sleep, I wondered what had gone wrong. Where did the love go? Was it ever really there? These questions haunted me, keeping me awake as the shadows of doubt crept closer. And then one day I found something that turned my world upside down. It was the tipping point, the moment I knew that ignorance was no longer bliss. It was the beginning of the end, or perhaps the end of the beginning. One evening, driven by a mix of suspicion and desperation, I decided to follow Claire. It felt like stepping into a bad dream. I shadowed her through the bustling city streets, my heart pounding with each step. And then outside our apartment building, I saw it, the moment that would shatter my world into pieces. There was a figure, tall and shadowy, waiting in the dim light. When Claire approached, they embraced, their kiss a silent confirmation of all my fears. I felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath my feet. My Claire, the woman I had loved and trusted, in the arms of another. I couldn't confront them right there. My body wouldn't move. I just stood frozen, as the scene burned into my memory. That night I didn't sleep a wink, each moment replaying like a cruel loop in my mind. The next day I confronted Claire. It was a conversation filled with anger, hurt, and disbelief. "How could you?" I demanded, my voice a mixture of pain and outrage. She tried to deny it at first, but the evidence was undeniable. Finally, she broke down, admitting she had been seeing someone else. But then she said something that took me by surprise. She swore it was over, that she realized it was a mistake, that she wanted to give us another chance. I wanted to believe her, to wipe the slate clean and start over. But could I? Could we? That confession opened a floodgate of emotions. I was angry, yes, but beneath that I felt a deep sense of loss. The woman I thought I knew was gone, replaced by a stranger with secrets. We talked for hours, the air filled with our voices, sometimes shouting, sometimes whispering. It was a dance of pain and hope, each trying to lead. Claire's admission of her affair was just the beginning. There were apologies, tears, and promises. But there were also lies unraveled and trust broken. She begged for forgiveness, for a chance to rebuild what we had. Part of me wanted to give in, to embrace her and pretend nothing had happened. But another part, the wounded part, held back. That night we reached a fragile truce. We agreed to try, to see if we could salvage the remnants of our relationship. But as we lay in bed, turned away from each other, the distance between us felt like a chasm. The silence was heavy, filled with unsaid words and unshed tears. In the days that followed, our home became a stage, each of us playing our parts in a script we hadn't written. We were walking on a tightrope, trying to find our way back to each other. But the shadows of the past loomed large, and I couldn't shake off the image of her in another's arms. I began to question everything: our past, our love, our future. Was this second chance a path to healing, or were we just delaying the inevitable? The answers eluded me, lost in a maze of betrayal and hurt. But one thing was clear. The journey ahead was going to be anything but easy. I agreed to give our relationship another chance, but deep down, doubt gnawed at me like a relentless worm. The trust we once shared had fractured, and with every passing day, the cracks only seemed to widen. I needed to know the full extent of Claire's betrayal, not just for peace of mind, but to safeguard my heart from further damage. That's when I decided to reach out to an old friend, Alex, who had a knack for uncovering secrets hidden in the digital world. He was a hacker, the kind who could find a needle in a haystack of data. I explained the situation to him, omitting no detail, my voice heavy with a mixture of anger and desperation. Alex agreed to help, and he delved into the task with a focus that was almost intimidating. Days passed, and the tension in our home thickened like fog. Claire tried to bridge the gap, her efforts tinged with the guilt that was palpable. But I was lost in a sea of doubt, waiting for Alex's findings. Then one evening Alex called. "Mark, you won't believe this," he said, his voice a mixture of shock and excitement. What he revealed next left me speechless. Claire's infidelity was just the tip of the iceberg. She was involved in something much bigger, much more dangerous. Claire wasn't just seeing another man. She was entangled in a web of corporate espionage. She was working for a rival company, and her lover was none other than the CEO of that corporation. My mind reeled as Alex laid out the evidence: emails, messages, even financial transactions. It was all there, a digital trail of deceit. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. Our entire relationship, our marriage, was a sham. Claire's affair was more than a mere betrayal of the heart. It was a calculated move in a game of corporate intrigue. I felt like a pawn in a game I didn't even know I was playing. That night, I confronted Claire with the evidence. The look of shock on her face slowly morphed into one of resignation. She didn't deny it, there was no point. The truth was out, naked and ugly. She tried to explain, to justify her actions, but her words fell on deaf ears. My heart was numb, my mind a whirlwind of anger and disbelief. Claire's betrayal was a double-edged sword, cutting through both my personal and professional life. Her affair with the CEO had given her access to confidential information about my company, information she had been feeding to her lover. I was living with the enemy. The aftermath was a blur of emotions and decisions. I felt betrayed, used, and foolish. How could I have been so blind? The woman I loved, the woman I had built a life with, was a stranger to me now. Our home, once a sanctuary, felt like a prison. In the following days, I took steps to protect myself and my company. I informed my superiors of Claire's actions, providing Alex's evidence. The fallout was immediate and severe. Claire was fired from her job, and her lover's company came under scrutiny for corporate espionage. As for our marriage, it was beyond repair. The foundation of trust and love had crumbled, leaving behind a wasteland of betrayal. I filed for divorce, a decision that was as painful as it was necessary. Claire's fall from grace was swift and brutal. She lost her job, her reputation, and eventually her lover. The man she had risked everything for abandoned her when the scandal broke. She was left alone, a pariah in a world she had tried to manipulate. I watched as she packed her things, her movements slow, defeated. There was no goodbye, no final words. She simply walked out the door, leaving behind a hollow echo of what our life once was. In the aftermath, I was left with a void where my heart used to be. I had loved Claire truly and deeply, but that love was based on a lie, a mirage that had vanished, leaving behind a bitter truth. As I sat in the silence of our now empty home, I realized that this was not the end, but a new beginning, a chance to rebuild, to find myself again. But the road ahead was long, and the shadows of the past lingered, a constant reminder of the price of trust misplaced. With the truth laid bare, I couldn't just stand by and watch my life crumble. I had to act, to take control of the narrative that had spiraled into chaos. It was time for retribution, and for that I needed a plan. Alex, with his digital prowess, was instrumental in what came next. Together, we gathered undeniable evidence of Claire's duplicity. Alex retrieved emails, messages, and documents that painted a clear picture of her betrayal. It was meticulous work, ensuring every piece of evidence was irrefutable. This wasn't just about exposing a personal betrayal. It was about protecting my career and my company from further damage. Once everything was in place, I took a deep breath and set the wheels in motion. I first approached my company's executives, laying out the evidence of Claire's espionage. The reaction was immediate and decisive. They were appalled, not just by the breach of trust, but by the depth of the deception. Claire's actions had endangered not just me, but the entire company. Next, I turned to Claire's employer. I presented them with the same evidence, watching as their expressions turned from skepticism to horror. They had been unknowingly complicit in her scheme, and the realization hit them hard. The impact of her actions rippled through both companies, leaving a trail of shock and anger. Claire's downfall was as swift as it was spectacular. She was fired from her job, her reputation in tatters. The industry is small, and news of her betrayal spread like wildfire. She became a pariah, a cautionary tale of ambition gone awry. But perhaps the most poetic part of her downfall was the abandonment by her lover, the CEO she had risked everything for. When the scandal broke, he distanced himself, denying any involvement. He left her to face the consequences alone, a stark contrast to their secret rendezvous filled with promises and passion. The news of Claire's downfall hit me with a mix of emotions. There was satisfaction, yes, but also a profound sadness. The woman I had loved, the woman I had shared my life with, had become a stranger. Her actions had not only destroyed our marriage but had also dismantled her own life. In the days that followed, I watched as Claire's world unraveled. She tried to reach out, to explain, to apologize. But I was done listening. The trust was broken, the love extinguished. I couldn't find it in me to forgive her, not after the web of lies and deceit she had woven. As I watched her pack her bags, her movements slow and defeated, I realized the gravity of what had transpired. Our life together, once filled with love and dreams, had ended in a storm of betrayal and revenge. There was no going back, no second chances. The finality of it all was overwhelming. In the quiet aftermath, I found myself alone in the house we once shared. The silence was deafening, a stark reminder of the void she had left behind. I sat there, lost in thought, pondering the journey that had brought me to this point. I had sought justice, and in a way I had achieved it. Claire had paid the price for her actions, her life irrevocably altered. But as I looked around at the empty walls, the unspoken words hanging in the air, I couldn't help but wonder at the cost. Yes, Claire had fallen, but the victory was bittersweet. In seeking retribution, I had lost a part of myself. The innocence, the belief in love and trust had been tarnished. I realized then that this wasn't just the end of our story. It was the beginning of my own journey of healing and rediscovery. The last time I saw Claire, she was a shadow of the woman I had once known. Her once vibrant eyes were dulled with defeat. Her posture, once confident and lively, now slumped with the weight of her choices. She came to me, a final plea in her voice, her words a mix of desperation and sorrow. "Mark, please," she implored, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I've done the unforgivable, but I'm begging you. Can you ever find it in your heart to forgive me?" Her plea hung in the air, heavy with the weight of our shattered past. I looked at her, really looked, and saw the magnitude of her fall. But the pain and betrayal were still too raw, the wounds too fresh. There were things that time couldn't heal, and actions that couldn't be undone. "Claire, I can't," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "What happened changed everything. I can't just forget it, as much as I might want to." The finality of my words seemed to break something in her. I saw the realization dawn in her eyes, the understanding that some bridges, once burnt, couldn't be rebuilt. She nodded, a silent acceptance of the end of our story. As she turned to leave, I felt a mix of emotions. Relief that this chapter was closing, sadness for what we had lost, and a lingering sense of what might have been. In the days that followed, I grappled with the aftermath of our broken marriage. The house felt empty, a constant reminder of the voyage she had left. I found myself wandering through rooms filled with memories, each a poignant echo of our life together. The hardest part was rebuilding trust, not just in others but in myself. How had I missed the signs? How had I allowed myself to be so deceived? The questions haunted me, a relentless shadow in my quest to move forward. I realized that trust, once broken, wasn't easily mended. It was like trying to piece together a shattered vase. Even if you managed to fit the pieces back together, the cracks would always be visible. I had to learn to trust again, but this time with more caution, more awareness of the fragility of human relationships. Slowly, I began to pick up the pieces of my life. I focused on work, on rebuilding my professional reputation that had been tarnished by Claire's actions. I reconnected with old friends, their support a lifeline in my darkest moments. But the journey wasn't easy. There were days when betrayal felt like a weight on my chest, days when the loneliness was overwhelming. Yet, with each passing day, I grew stronger, more resilient. I learned to embrace the solitude, to find peace in the quiet. As time passed, I realized that turning the page wasn't just about moving on from Claire, it was about rediscovering myself. I had been so entwined in our relationship that I had lost sight of who I was without her. Now I had the chance to explore that, to build a new identity, one that wasn't defined by the shadows of betrayal. I also learned that forgiveness wasn't just about absolving Claire, it was about freeing myself from the chains of anger and bitterness. It didn't happen overnight, and there were moments when the old hurt resurfaced. But with each act of forgiveness, however small, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. In the end, I realized that life was a tapestry of experiences, both good and bad. Each experience, each person we encounter shapes us in some way. Claire had been a part of my tapestry, a dark thread in a complex weave. But her part in my story had ended, and it was time to weave new patterns, new experiences. As I sat in my living room, the sun setting outside, casting a warm glow over the room, I felt a sense of calm. The journey ahead